Good morning. Welcome to the Chamber's virtual legislative breakfast. We clearly would have liked to have been gathering in person, but given some of the changes that have come about, given the recent surge in the COVID cases, we've opted to keep the meeting in place because there are some important topics to discuss, primarily at the state level as the General Assembly comes back into session next week. But we've added a COVID update today. So we'll wait. We've got a good crowd so far. We've got, looks like about almost 70 folks on the line right now, and I think a couple more will be coming in. But in the interest of time, we're going to try to keep things moving along. Just by way of introduction, my name is Mark Kleinschmidt. I have the privilege of serving as the president and CEO of the Anne Arundel Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to welcome you all here. And I'd like to turn it over to our new chairperson this year, Mr. Stephen Brown. Stephen.
Good morning, everybody. Well, thank you so much for being here this morning. This has been a staple of chamber activity, having this legislative breakfast to get you, our members, the opportunity to connect with our elected officials of our county here. So I'm Stephen Brown, as Mark introduced. I'm an attorney with McAllister, Detar, Showalter, and Walker, and I am the newly elected chair of the board of directors. And on behalf of the board of directors, I welcome you all here. I've been with the chamber for about 5 years in various roles, and I've gotten the opportunity to see it grow and come through some really tough times with the COVID pandemic that hit all associations and businesses. So now we're here in a very strong growth position to continue to advocate for our members, to help them with networking and help educate them on the various issues going on in our county and our state. And with that, we have a number of elected officials here today that will give you an insight into what they foresee in the General Assembly this year. We have Senator Elfert, Senator Reilly, Delegate Rogers, and Delegate Kipke here to speak this morning. And in addition to that, we also have two special guests to speak on the recent uptick of the COVID pandemic in our county. We have both the county executive, Stuart Pittman, and the president of Luminous Health Systems, Sherry Perkins, to be able to speak about what's going on at the hospital as well. So to kick things off, I want to turn it over to County Executive Stuart Pittman for him to discuss what we're looking at here in the county. Mute. There we go.
Thanks, Steve. Still learning that. And thank you, Mark, for putting this together and the whole team at the chamber. Yeah, I was not scheduled to speak here until the COVID surge, and they wanted an update. I understand that we're going to be doing another session with the chamber on county and another one on city, different than last year and the past year. So appreciate that. But so sticking to COVID, a little bit of background. I mean, I've met with all of the chambers in the county about COVID restrictions and the impacts on businesses throughout this pandemic. And I'm glad to say that we're in a very different place thanks to the fact that we have vaccines. We have a much more powerful tool than we had back when, at the beginning of this, the governor closed all non-essential businesses, and nobody knew just how bad it was going to be. We were looking at Italy and New York, and the tools were very different. And rather than look back on whether that was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, I think we just acknowledge that it was a very scary time. And we've got most of our county residents vaccinated, but not all. And the folks that are not vaccinated are the ones, of course, who are being impacted by this most recent surge in a way that's overwhelming our hospitals. And Sherry will talk some about that. But I want to first give you a few statistics on the current state of this surge. Some that I hadn't, we didn't have statistics through most of December, so it was awkward trying to project what was going to happen. But I think, as you know, the hospitalization numbers have gone up by about 500% or more. Sherry will give you the situation at Anne Arundel Medical Center, but I have data that says 254 hospitalized COVID patients today between our two hospitals. We were below 40 earlier in the month. The percent positivity of the folks that are getting tested and reporting, which is a small percentage of the ones testing, because I think it's mostly the PCR tests, not the take-home tests that we have data on. So we really don't know the percentage of our population that's infected right now that's positive, but the positivity rate went from 23% to 30% in the last week. The folks are still getting vaccinated. I show that over the last week, 4,000 vaccinations were given, but some of those were boosters, of course. Some of them were second doses. So I would like to, and I think we would all like to see that number going up faster. The deaths, though, was not reported and has not been reported much. And I was shocked to see, we've all been hoping that this narrative that Omicron is less severe will play out both in hospitalizations and deaths. And I think it has to some degree. It's just that our numbers are so much higher that those numbers are still high. And so just yesterday, we had 5 deaths. I can't remember a day where we've had that many. And in the last week in the county, this is county numbers, we have had 21 lives lost to COVID, which puts us at 834 for the pandemic so far. And so I have been in touch with everybody that I can, the health officer pretty much constantly, the governor's office as well, county council. As you know, we did implement the mask mandate for indoor public places, businesses that are open to the public in particular, working to protect both employees and customers. I have been curious about how businesses feel about that. If you look on social media, you'll see it's blowing up. If you're a member of the council that's going to vote on tomorrow morning, whether to extend this indoor mask mandate to most likely the end of the month, and then take a look at that point. They'll tell you that they've been inundated with comments on the topic. I sent out an email to many of you, I think about 5,000 businesses, and we had 513 come back so far, asking how the surge is impacting your business, how a mask mandate impacts your business, whether you support a mask mandate. And I want to thank everybody who responded, because I haven't gotten through them all, but I'm reading through these comments and they're very thoughtful and very constructive. And I think everybody's on the same page that they want to beat this pandemic. They want their employees to be able to come to work, and they don't want the closures that we had early in the pandemic. And I want to assure you that that's not on my agenda. It's not on the governor's agenda, and I don't think it's on anybody on the council's agenda to be closing businesses at this point, or even restricting numbers in businesses. But on the masks, we did have, of the respondents, 188 said they do not support a mask mandate. 325 said they do support a mask mandate. So that was about a 63 to 37% split there. Not surprised. I did hear from a lot of businesses that employees are, a lot of folks are out sick, and we're having that problem in our public safety departments, in particular, police, fire, all of government agencies. The road clearing was slower because we had about 15% of our public works folks out who would otherwise have been on plows. So it's impacting us everywhere, even for those mild cases where people are just out with a cold-like symptoms, and then need to quarantine for a while after that. Testing has been frustrating, the availability, both PCR and the take-home tests. We have a limited number of staff, of course, in the health department, and they're divided between those who do the testing work and those who do the vaccinations, and many of them are the same people. So we are trying to move more into PCR testing and do more of that, but we have limited staff to do that. We were thrilled that the governor made a partnership with Anne Arundel Medical Center and opened up that new PCR testing site at the hospital, and Sherry might be able to talk more about that. But of course, there's long waits for that. You can't make an appointment, you show up. So we invested county money. We bought 100,000 tests that we distributed right before the holidays. We got them out as quickly as we possibly could in a major countywide effort. And then we ordered another 200,000, which took an extra week to get here. And the first 100,000 of those is going to the school system so kids can take them home. And hopefully that will reduce the amount of spread in schools. And then the other 100,000 will be distributed through our libraries and other local organizations. But it's not enough. It's nowhere near enough, and we know that. And we're hearing that, supply will likely be increasing in stores, likely be increasing from the state of Maryland and from the federal government. We are having to make difficult decisions about how much county resources to spend on continuing to buy these take-home tests and distribute them. So I guess I should mention on the mask mandate as well. I mean, I have been very, very clear that I support it at this point. I was the last of the county executives in Central Maryland to take that step. All of the others, the Central Maryland counties, our neighbors, now have a mask mandate in public places in effect, and it's been extended in places by county councils, often with bipartisan votes. And I'm hoping for that on Friday, but we'll see what the council decides on extending that. If it's not extended, we'll certainly encourage people to continue wearing masks, and we'll also encourage businesses that have signs up now saying masks required to keep those signs up. And I know it's much more difficult if you're a business, if you're making that decision, than if somebody above you is making that decision. It's just a difficult situation for all. And the only other thing I want to say, and I want to stop here and let you get on with the rest of this meeting, which is about the legislative session and hearing from Sherry. But I am optimistic. Maybe I'm too optimistic because I didn't think this surge was going to be this bad. Nobody thought that we were going to have 3,000 hospitalized in the state, and projections now of 5,000 hospitalized in the state. And I know all of us are, as I like to say, holding our hospital workers in the light, and as they work through this time. But I am optimistic. I believe that the projections show, and I believe that the numbers will drop steeply as they rose steeply, and that February, March, and into the spring, things are going to be looking great. I'm optimistic about the economy, economic indicators moving in the right direction in this county. Our county finances are in great shape. We're starting to work on our budget. We had our first budget community town hall last night. I hope some of you will participate in these town halls. There are 6 more coming, 1 in each council district. And the good news is that we've been fiscally disciplined in this county. I expect our bond rating to actually increase. We've increased the funds in our rainy day fund. And we're looking forward to implementing our Plan 2040, which is our growth plan in the county. And you're going to see some legislative initiatives that are going to make it easier to do business in this county, easier to do development that's good development that is encouraged in that plan. And I'm looking forward to working with all the chambers on that. So I will pass it back and wish you all best of luck getting through these coming weeks and days.
Well, thank you very much, County Executive. We appreciate you making the time to get here, and we know we got a lot on your plate. So thank you very much for engaging with us. And next we have Sherry Perkins here to bring us the details from the hospital's perspective and what's going on over there. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us, because we know you too have an enormous amount of things on your plate. So thank you for carving out the time, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Mark, for inviting me. I'm actually very pleased to be here to check in with all of you, and I'll say thank you always to our county executive for the partnership that we enjoy, and it's good to have been able to see our senators and delegates as we were popping into the waiting room there as you begin your session. So, to maybe reflect a bit on what county executive said here, we are very optimistic. And maybe you didn't expect me to say that, but we are very optimistic because of the partnerships we have. But I'm also very mindful that, and we spoke about it a little bit even as we were gathering, the unique toll that this pandemic has had on each of you. No matter what your role is, what your leadership role is, what your business role is, what your family situation is, it's had a unique toll on every one of you. And, some change, some loss, but also I would say, and I think across this gallery, the names, I see some unique opportunity for partnership. And I think it reflects what makes this such a great community to live in, for our schools, our businesses, for housing, And then really uniquely and perhaps spotlighted, excuse the Zoom pun, but spotlighted here is healthcare. And so I'm going to give you a quick update for what the county executive said, but I also have an ask of you. And the ask is to ask you to amplify across your customers, your employees, your friends, your families, amplify our message. The time is now to be vaccinated and boosted and follow other practices so we can better care for you. It has taken a toll on hospitals. And again, I'll say a bit more about it, but the time is now to ask you to help us help you better. So county executives already run through some of this status, but we've had this multiplier of case rates in the county and in the state. To give you a real life example, in the hospital 1 month ago, we had 28 patients with COVID at Luminous Health Anne Arundel Medical Center. Today we have 128. So think about the multiplier that is. And we've got more than 3,000 hospitalized across the state. And as we indicated, this is projected to grow over the next couple of weeks. Very importantly, 2/3 of these patients hospitalized are not vaccinated or boosted. So these are avoidable. And as we've said, we've got different tools now. These hospitalizations were avoidable. I'll also mention, we've at our hospital here, we've got 128 people with COVID, but there's another 200 patients in the hospital, 200 plus with something else. So I want to be reassuring that we're here for you. The hospital is safe. We're here for you. We're open. We've got our mental health services that we opened up just during the pandemic at the J. Kent McNew Family Medical Center for inpatient psychiatry. We have open heart surgery. We deliver, as we say, a kindergarten class of babies every day. So the hospital is open and safe. And we would like to see different practices to move down the number of hospitalizations that are due to COVID. And as we've already indicated, this has, as it has in your businesses, a significant impact on the workforce. We have more folks out due to COVID, and then that has its impact. But the overall toll of a couple of years of managing this pandemic has certainly been significant. And we do appreciate how much support you demonstrate to us. I want to comment briefly about what you may be following in the media and through other ways about what's called crisis standard protocols. And many of the hospitals in our state, because of this surge and the impact on the workforce and the need to balance our staffing with increasing need for care to patients with COVID, we've implemented what is called crisis standard protocols. And many have asked me, well, what does that mean? So what it means is we've rescheduled surgeries that require inpatient beds, so that there's a lot of delayed surgeries that you will experience, not cancellation, as we did early in the pandemic. Again, order of magnitude to remind you, the hospitalizations we saw in May here in Annapolis, in May of 2020, we peaked out at about 110. A year ago, we peaked out at about the same number, and now we're more than that. So we've had to implement these crisis protocols with things like, as I mentioned, canceling surgery. We've deployed non-clinical staff to our clinical areas to support the clinical workers. We are stretching staffing ratios. We're using spaces that we wouldn't ordinarily use for care of patients. And we're strongly, to get on this topic of testing, strongly recommending that folks avoid the emergency department except for emergent needs. So think about what you need to use an emergency department for. It's for stroke, it's for heart attack, it's for broken bones. It's, a different circumstance, but we had seen in the past month an increase of folks seeking the emergency department for COVID testing. And I'm very optimistic to tell you that we've seen that switch a little bit with the advent of the testing sites that we additionally have available. So again, safety first. We're paying attention to your safety, but we do have these crisis protocols in place. I'll note again, I am very, very grateful for the unique partnerships that have happened in businesses throughout this pandemic, for the very special partnership we have with County Health and with County Executive Pittman, and for, as he mentioned, just Friday, and we've now tested thousands already, just Friday, Governor Hogan and the National Guard testing site that we were able to implement on our campus here in Annapolis. But that the testing capacity locally and across the state, this is certainly a point of concern, that we need to make sure that that testing capacity is available. I'll also mention, and this doesn't always get amplified, is increasing the awareness of vaccination for children. We are certainly seeing this surge, this wave, have a different kind of impact on children, and there's so much availability that we didn't have months ago, and those guidelines continue to be updated to emphasize vaccination for our kids, including now boosting of our kids. So I'll end on this. Again, the time is now. Thank you for amplifying our messages around vaccine, boosting, avoiding crowds. Just the idea that this is organized this way by Zoom and you pivoted to this is a great tribute to the chamber for not bringing folks together. Vax, boost, avoid crowds, wear the mask, get tested, and avoid the emergency department for testing. Thank you very much for how you support our healthcare workers always. Back to you, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Sherry. And again, we switched very quickly on a dime to this remote setup in consultation with the hospital, and it was very clear that this was the right move. So as much as it's not what we wanted to do and what we wanted to be, we want to be in front of everybody, we want to be getting coffee together, we want to be, having that connection, that social connection. Sometimes it's hard to make these types of decisions, but with the direction, sort of the consultation with the hospital and the message that's going around the community, this was the right move. So with that, we thank you very much, Sherry, for taking your time being here. Likewise with County Exec Pittman. And now we're going to move on to the legislative portion of the presentation here, and I'll turn it over to Mark to introduce and moderate our panel.
Great, great. Thank you, Stephen. And again, thank you to County Executive Pittman and to Sherry for spending some time with us. I'm going to ask Amy if she can put into the chat box the link to the survey that the County Executive mentioned. I think data is important, as we've learned in this last year, to get information. And so if you have an opportunity, if you haven't done so, to use that survey, that would be great. Well, it's certainly been a challenging year as we've gotten together. Our vocabulary has certainly expanded as we've come across words like Zoom, asymptomatic, outdoor dining, PPP, PPE. We've encountered a recession. We've dealt with a flood. We've dealt with tornadoes. And we continue to move forward as we need to. And through the course of this over the last year, all levels of government have had to step up and deal with this new vocabulary and all the ancillary challenges that it's been created. And I don't think that we can all fully appreciate the level of focus and intensity that all our elected people had to give to this issue on every level, because it seemed that any decision that got made was going to anger some and help others. So it was a tough spot. So from the Chamber's perspective, we would like to say thank you to all the elected leaders for all that you have done over the last year to kind of combat and work through this crisis and picking up on what Sherry Perkins said, partnerships have been key. So if we were together, there would be applause. So if we can do virtual applause for all our elected folks, that is certainly in order. So having said that, what we want to do now is kind of move forward and talk a little bit or a lot about some of the issues that are going to be facing us at the General Assembly and how they can relate back to businesses here in Anne Arundel County. So what we have put together is we've got speakers from the Senate and from the House to kind of just give a little bit of an outline on what they see in the into the future and how they may affect Anne Arundel County. And perhaps the first thing, we're going to start with Senator Elfreth, and maybe I'll ask the Senator to kick us off, and then just give us a little bit of how's the Senate going to operate this session, or is that still a work in progress?
Well, Mark, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Thank you to the Chamber for organizing this and pivoting on a dime to keep everybody safe. And I thank the county executive and Sherry Perkins has just done an incredible job leading our hospital system. And she and I check in every so often. And I can tell you it's been a long 2 years for her staff in particular. So I think this decision this morning was the right thing to do. And I do want to recognize, Mark, if I could, just a couple of other elected officials who are here today. I think you might have a quorum of the city council on, so it's good to see all of them here, as well as Senator Beidel, Delegate Henson, and Delegate Bagnall. So first, thank you for having me. To answer your question, we just found out last night, we got the email at about 10 p.m. of how the Senate will be operating. We are the smaller chamber, we're 47 senators, so we are going to be convening on the floor in person. The hockey boxes are down. If folks saw pictures from last session, we had glass and wood boxes surrounding each of our seats, and that was made it very difficult for us, frankly, to work together, to communicate, to do what the Senate does best, which is be collegial. So those thankfully are down. We will be on the floor, we will be masked. Committees will be meeting for hearings virtually for the first month or so until about February 14th. And then the Senate president is going to consult with health experts and reevaluate if we can, in fact, have committee hearings back in person. Committee voting sessions will be in person and live streamed. So there will be, in some ways, last session, I would argue, was in some ways more accessible to the public than in years past because we were streaming more things. The Senate floor is streamed now. Folks can participate from their couches and their pajamas if that's what they want, instead of having to drive to Annapolis and park, which is kind of unfortunate for my district representing Annapolis and our local economy. So this will, if I were betting, this will be a hybrid session. So that's the Senate operations moving forward for now.
Great. Yeah, and I think that to the Senate's credit, trying to figure out how to piece this together but more importantly, move forward to do the work of the people. Yeah. So as we get started, as you all get started next week, what do you see as some of the leading issues confronting the General Assembly? Yeah,
well, it's been quite a year, and Mark, you touched on a couple of the challenges we had. I'm just going to go backwards for just a minute. We started out last session with a great deal of uncertainty around the budget. And I serve on the Budget and Taxation Committee, so that's my primary focus during the legislative session. Thankfully, our budget news turned out to be a little bit better, and the first piece of business we took up was passing the Relief Act, and we did that at lightning speed for a legislature. We got it done in the first 30 days, working with the governor hand in hand, and that put $1 billion back into the economy here in Maryland, supporting things like tourism, the arts, restaurants, our food banks, things like that to keep folks employed and businesses open. We also increased funding to the Small Business Development Center. That was a bill that I had that I think is incredibly important for us to be supporting, business growth. We also, importantly, increased state funding to local health departments, which unfortunately it was cut back in the Great Recession, and we've never really made up for that cut. So we are all recognizing the incredible importance of our local health departments. So we increased state funding there. And then we also passed a pretty big bill, the Digital Connectivity Act. And by virtue of us being virtual today, I think we can all agree a lesson learned from the pandemic is that it's never been so important for Marylanders to be connected. If it's for telehealth, which is something we also expanded, or kids learning in school, like Stephen's kids this morning, hopefully, or small businesses. Being connected is incredibly important, and yet 500,000 Marylanders don't have access to reliable internet. So, and it's not just a rural broadband problem, and this is a rural, suburban, urban challenge in terms of connectivity and speed and affordability. So I worked with Delegate Brooke Learman from Baltimore City to pass this bill, and working with the governor's office, we put $400 million of federal funding into shoring up our broadband infrastructure, mapping out the gaps that we have across the state, and really focusing on that speed and connectivity and affordability as well. So those are just a couple of things we got done in the last session. And then, Mark, you mentioned we've had quite a fall, particularly here in Annapolis. We had, of course, the tornado in September that touched down and devastated quite a lot of small businesses and homes in Edgewater and Parole. And then we had the flood soon after. I can tell you we learned a lot of lessons about how to best get funding, relief funding out on the street as quickly as possible. The tornado, unfortunately, was a little bit of a bureaucratic mess. There was no state of emergency declared at the state level. So the funding we were able to shore up, eventually it was $4 million from the state's catastrophic relief fund, but that took a little bit longer than all of us would like, particularly for the folks who still have tarps on their roofs in Parole and Edgewater, and for small businesses that are still not reopened. We were able to get that $4 million, and just before Christmas, the governor announced that we are converting that $4 million from loans to grants. So just incredible news for everybody who was impacted by that tornado. Now the flood, there was a state of emergency declared. And so the Anne Arundel Economic Development Corporation, I want to thank Ben Burge and his wonderful team. We were able to get money out the door very quickly for those small businesses that were impacted by the flood. About $650,000 in grants to those businesses, and many of them are reopened pretty quickly and are keeping folks employed. So we learned a lot of lessons about how to get that money out and keep businesses open despite a tornado, a flood, and let's hope we don't get a swarm of locusts next. But you asked for me to talk a little bit about next session. A couple of things. I think one of the biggest issues will certainly be legalization of cannabis. That is not going to be before the Budget and Taxation Committee. Obviously, we care about it because it is a revenue generator. It will be before the Judicial Proceedings Committee and the Finance Committee. And my best guess is that we're going to set up some infrastructure, but put it on the ballot for next November. So I would anticipate it being on the ballot in November. But serving on the Budget and Tax Committee, we have, for the first time in anybody's real memory, a structural surplus of at least $2.5 billion. That's very exciting. I'm still getting used to saying the word structural surplus together. The trick for us is going to be, how do we support Maryland's economy, invest in the services that Marylanders are expecting, particularly as this pandemic is still hanging over our heads, but not spend ourselves back into a structural deficit. So you're going to see a lot of infrastructure funding, kind of one-time funding to get out there, particularly for things like higher education capital dollars. We will be making large investments in transportation, which is incredibly important for small businesses. We'll be shoring up the state's rainy day fund to make sure that, if we have another catastrophe, that we are well prepared and positioned. And the Senate President also asked me to look into how to find some tax relief for seniors who are on fixed incomes. So we're going to be looking into that as well. And the last piece I'll tell you, I have spent the fall working with former Governor Glenn Denning and Delegate Eric Lutke on the State Parks Investment Commission. And I really do look at this as a kind of pandemic response. The silver lining is that we all rediscovered our incredible green spaces in state parks. We saw about a 45% visitorship increase over the pandemic. That's the good news. The bad news is we have, for decades, regardless of governor, underinvested in our state parks and have a very high backlog of maintenance on parking lots, bathrooms, trails, things like that. So we're going to be making a once in a generation investment into our state parks. And that's good for a lot of reasons. Our public health, certainly, recreation, but it's also going to be good for our economy. Our state parks bring about $650 million in economic benefit to the state and our local economy. So making these investments, acquiring new state parks, positioning better infrastructure is all going to be very good for Maryland small businesses moving forward. So with that, Mark, I'll stop and just offer to this group anytime to please reach out to our offices. We will be able to have folks in person in our offices if folks feel safe and if we feel safe. But I would always recommend meeting virtually over Zoom, or I'm happy to meet outdoors with people. We will be doing open office hours in my office every week to make sure that I'm constantly hearing from folks, but I will drop my email in the chat, and just please, we can't do our jobs without this group, without folks participating. And I really appreciate folks participating this morning. Thanks, Mark.
Great, thank you, Senator. Real quick question, kind of something that's going to tie together city, county, state. Some legislation that you were very instrumental in last year was the Resiliency Authority. So maybe just give a quick update on that. And I know that the city will be talking about that at length when we have the mayor in, hopefully next month.
Yes, the Resilience Authority is a bill we passed in 2020, which feels like a decade ago at this point. We've gone through fire since then, but it's enabling legislation at the state level to allow counties and municipalities to independently of each other or jointly, and that's the case here in Annapolis and Anne Arundel County, form resilience authorities, and that would give them the ability to finance large infrastructure projects like the city dock moving forward. So it doesn't affect the city or county's debt capacity because it's its own independent entity with a lot of oversight and a lot of reporting back to all three levels of government, but it will allow for us to invest in these critical infrastructure projects that are just prohibitively expensive if we don't finance them. So Charles County has already moved forward. They kind of beat us to the punch, and they have, I think, like 40 infrastructure projects they're using this structure for. But City Dock is next up here in Annapolis, and I actually live just a block from City Dock, so I am particularly excited, not for the construction, but certainly for the outcome.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that's a great example of three levels of government kind of working together. So great, thank you again. Want to also just thank our sponsors for today that make a lot of this happen. They work with us to help pivot to the virtual. So that would be 1631 Media, Live Hotel Casino, Comcast, the Anne Arundel County Workforce Development Group, Care First. So those have been great supporters of us to make today possible. So we are thankful for that. So we want to move forward and continue our focus on the General Assembly and from the Senate side, and ask Senator Ed Reilly to share his thoughts on where we're heading and how things are going. Senator. Oh, got to hit the unmute. If you could unmute, Senator, I think we've got to hit that one button and we'll be good to go. There we are.
Very much. Thank you very much, Mark. Thanks for everybody for being here. It's very difficult to follow Senator Elfreth. She's a wealth of information and she gets it out very well, very quickly. We do have a few other things that we can add on to her comments. For instance, with the upcoming session, last year, all of the testimony was virtual, and we were only allowed a limited number of people to testify in favor or against different legislation. The letter that came out from President Ferguson said there will be the opportunity for unlimited testimony. So that means our sessions will go on a little bit more, but rather than just 6 people, 3 for, and 3 against, testifying, those of you who may have missed the opportunity last year to weigh in on important issues will be given that opportunity. The other thing that Senator Elfreth did is she recognized a couple of folks who are with us. Also, Delegate Sid Saab is with us, also monitoring this meeting. So Sid, thanks for joining. Mark, you mentioned all the great things that happened in Annapolis over the past year, the catastrophes. Don't forget, the rest of us are now under 10 inches of snow here in Crofton. And it was a very unusual snow event. We haven't had one like this in a long time. And that is an equal opportunity event because the county got covered pretty well. Senator Elfreth mentioned the fall special session. It was called specifically for the redistricting having to do with the congressional districts. And the map that was presented by the Democratic majority was passed. The Republicans, I was the leader on the floor with this issue, offered an alternative, which was rejected, 32-15 along party lines. And now that congressional map is been submitted for the judicial review. The congressional map will first go to the Anne Arundel County court system. There are two different groups who have filed suit in this area. And then after the circuit court makes their decision, I'm sure it will be appealed to the Court of Special Appeals, the highest court in Maryland, which will soon have its name changed to the Maryland Supreme Court, but not today. Also during our special session, it was the first opportunity for the body to review all of the bills which were vetoed by Governor Hogan after our 2021 session. The most controversial of those vetoes was of the police reform bills. And they were passed during the session on a party line vote. After the session was closed, the governor vetoed them. And when we came back together, that was the first opportunity for override, and all of those police reform bills were overridden and we're moving forward in becoming effective. There was also a great discussion during that time about the governor's crime bill. He was trying to put more teeth into the ability to take felons, especially gun-related crimes, to address the parole, sentencing, and trying to drive down the murder rate across the state, but especially in Baltimore City. And the governor's crime bill was rejected by the democratically controlled Senate. Senator Elfreth also brought up the cannabis issue, and her comment was, it's a generator. Just as a reminder, we've had medical marijuana for several years now, but I'm sorry, medical cannabis for several years now. But as many of us know, it's considered a drug, and drugs are not taxed. So all of the medical cannabis sales are not providing a significant amount of money to the state coffers. Recreational cannabis could provide that. But I have always had a public position that I'm against recreational marijuana, recreational cannabis, and I will continue to advocate against that, even though we have an argument concerning revenue. I think the social benefits are significantly better not to have that in our industry, in our community. So as we face the next 90 days, starting next week, the number one issue that we will face, the first issue we will face, is legislative redistricting. So the special session was for the 8 members of Congress. This will be for the 188 members of the General Assembly. There has been a map that has been presented by the Legislative Redistricting Commission. It has made some significant changes throughout Anne Arundel County and throughout the state of Maryland, but I'd like to focus just a few seconds on District 33. So District 33 has been kind of that when you squeeze the balloon, different areas contract, different areas expand, and District 33 over the many redistricting cycles have been kind of pushed and pulled from time to time. Well, this one is the most significant redistricting of the Central District. I go from Crofton, Severna Park, out to the Bay Bridge, Central Anne Arundel County. My current district goes from Spalding High School in the north to Southern High School in the south. We're truly Central Anne Arundel County. So they're going to take away 40,000 of our current constituents around the Severna Park area, around the Severn area, and they're going to attach about 30,000 people from the Odenton Town Center area, places that have always been represented by the folks from Northern Anne Arundel County or Senator Rosapep. The other thing they're going to do is they're going to take Anne Arundel County and break it into 3 House sections. They call them sub-districts. Arnold and Cape St. Clair will be one area. Crofton, Crownsville, and below Benfield Road in Severna Park will be a second one. And the third piece will be over in the Odenton area. Generally, you do sub-districts in order to find candidates from areas that might not be well represented. For instance, Seth Howard represents Southern Anne Arundel County. It's an appropriate thing to have a sub-district down there. Otherwise, all three delegates would be from Annapolis. We have Ned Carey up in Glen Burnie, who has a single member district in that area. And again, it makes sense if there is a concern that there won't be proper representation. But we've never had the problem in 33. We have Delegate Bagnall out in Arnold. We currently have Rachel Munoz in Severna Park, and we have Sid Saab over here by Crofton. So we already have a balance of geographic representation. So I'm not quite sure the reason for that. But in any event, that will be an interesting topic. This redistricting of legislative districts will be done by resolution, which means once the resolution passes, the governor won't veto it. It doesn't go to his desk. The next step will take the resolution directly to the Maryland Court of Appeals, the Maryland Supreme Court, and they'll have a chance to review to see if it meets state constitutional guidelines. So the redistricting, we may not know who we represent for probably 45 to 60 days. So keep your eyes up. It's a very controversial issue. Always the person with the pen always seems to have the advantage. So we'll see what comes from that. We have a final bill that's going to be submitted to the General Assembly this year by Senator Kagan, and I'm the co-sponsor. It's the 911 Next Generation Bill. For those of you who may have followed this issue, 5 years ago, if you called 911 on a cell phone with a out-of-state number, they couldn't find you. Domino's Pizza could find you, Uber can find you, but the Anne Arundel County Fire and Police Department didn't have the technology to locate unless you had really a landline. So over the past few years, Senator Kagan and the 911 Commission has formulated many bills to help the funding and to help the technology. For instance, 5 years ago, if you called or if you wanted to text 911, couldn't do it. If you wanted to send them a picture, couldn't do it. So these technology changes are coming. They're expensive. We've increased the funding to the 911 Commission to allow purchase of the hardware and technology. And we're looking forward to having one of the core functions of government be brought up into modern times. Those are my remarks, Mark. As always, be happy to take any questions.
Great. Well, thank you, Senator. We're going to do Q&A after our friends from the House side speak. Again, thank you for your service and your input on so many key issues. Representation is certainly important, and redistricting is a challenging task. Just a real quick question on the congressional side. At this point in time, this brings a fifth Congress district into Anne Arundel County, so there'd be 5 different congressmen. What's
no, I believe it's just the opposite. One of the things I've shared over the years is for the past 10 years, we've had 4 congressional representatives. We have more congressional representatives than 17 states. Right. This is, I believe the new map brings us down to 3 representatives.
Okay.
I'll have to double check that, but that's what was presented to us when the maps were introduced.
Right. The concern was that, so as you articulated, that many representatives for our area. So it's something. So, all right. Well, thank you for that update. Well, let's move over to the House. And before we do that, I want to just say thank you to a lot of our the Chamber board members who are here today. It's a little harder to call everybody out on Zoom as it would have been in person, but thank you, board members, for your service and helping out the Chamber move and navigate through what's been an interesting 18 to 24 months. So with that, let's move over and kind of hear from the House of Delegates how the session is stacking up. And I'm going to ask Delegate Mike Rogers from District 32 to share some thoughts with us. Delegate.
So, Mark, good morning. And for all the business leaders on the call, thank you for the opportunity to spend a couple minutes with you this morning and talk about, what we, and to use the British vernacular analogy, what you've heard from the House of Lords, so now it's time to hear from the House of Commons. And so we appreciate you giving us an opportunity to talk to you. And I would also want to take the opportunity. I know Senator Elfreth, after she gave her drop the mic presentation, and Senator Reilly, after he spoke to us, gave us a primer on the redistricting process, both during the special session and the upcoming session. I will not touch that. I'll leave it right where he left it. And but I do want to take an opportunity to recognize a couple colleagues in their new roles. So for those that weren't aware, and I know we've listed all the elected officials on the call, but want to acknowledge the fact that Delegate Bagnall is the incoming vice chair for the delegation, and Delegate Henson, who's on the call, will be the chair of the capital budget subcommittee. So lots of capital budget opportunities coming up, and so she'll be leading that effort. And then Mark, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge you and thank you for your leadership. About I guess less than a month ago, you gave the 32nd legislative district, Senator Biden, myself, Delegate Bartlett, Delegate Chang, an opportunity to come from before this group and really listen to some of the concerns and things that are out there, and I think that's very important. And the one other thing that I want to mention is, and so this is, I see you've made, Mark, a couple paid political announcements, so I'm going to do one for you. I believe on the 27th of January, there's going to be a best COVID-19 business practices that's going to be led by Dr. K. And I think that's really a great opportunity to inform the process in terms of what works and what doesn't work. So on the House side, and obviously we work very closely with the Senate. One of the big things that hasn't been mentioned that I think that was important during the last legislative session was some of the unemployment insurance reforms that came about in terms of making the process a little bit more streamlined, but also focusing on ways to deal with some of the fraud that we faced that was coming out of some of the earlier claims. So that would be the one big ticket item that wasn't addressed, and I think that will serve Marylanders well. But I sort of want to pivot with the remaining time that I have to talk about, and I know that Sherry Perkins spoke a little bit about this, but some of the impacts that we could have never imagined that the business environment has faced, as we know it. So, most of my time in the military, I spent as a logistics officer and doing government contracting. And I think that, our business environment really has changed. Everything from logistical systems being challenged, supply lines disrupted, stores having problems keeping things on shelves. And, even I've noticed Amazon, they used to have next day shipping. Well, now it's maybe 2 or 3 days or maybe even a week later. So those are things that some of the challenges that we've been facing, and the way we communicate has changed. Certainly the internet's there. And I know, we've been used to Skype and webinars and FaceTime, but who could have imagined a couple of years ago, Teams and Zoom? I mean, they really didn't exist. And as a result, and I think some of the things that the county executive alluded to, but also Ms. Perkins, some of the social, emotional, and behavior impacts of the pandemic, which is really becoming an endemic, are impacting the way that we interact with each other. And they're in turn impacting our own individual psyche. And I think we're seeing a lot of that in the school system right now. And that sort of kind of creates a circular effect. So I think all of this has really had an impact on local businesses and our economic conditions. And I think the businesses that are leading edge innovators and disruptors who solve some of these challenges, I think will do exceedingly well. So from a legislative viewpoint, as policy prescriptions go, I think that, those folks that come up with some of those ideas and share with us those ways that we can help from a policy perspective will, I think, improve the business conditions that we have going forward. So I just look forward to listening to some of the ideas that businesses have to offer, and similar to Senator Elfreth, I will put my information in the chat so that folks can reach out to me. And I guess the one thing that I didn't mention, I'll mention very quickly in terms of operating environment on the House side, very similar on the Senate side, although I know that we had planned, and I notice I say had planned, to do committee hearings virtually. And I think that's still the case. I think in terms of meeting in person, we had planned to have in-office meetings and vote on the floor. But I think as a result of Omicron, more or newer guidance, will be forthcoming, and so we'll just adapt and be flexible. As I told another group earlier, as my military moniker, flexibility is the key to air power. So we'll adjust and be flexible. So thank you for the opportunity, and look forward to any questions.
Thank you, Delegate. And I think you're exactly right about flexibility. I think businesses have had to pivot to deal with the pandemic, and government you guys have had to pivot to do things to support businesses. And it's a dynamic situation as we kind of walk through this together. So again, thank you for those comments and all that you do for us. So let's keep kind of plowing ahead here with the in the House side, and then we'll have Q&A. So I was going to ask Delegate Nick Kipke, I think is with us, to share some thoughts on what he is seeing for the upcoming session. So,
good morning.
There we are. Hello, Delegate. Good morning to you.
Happy New Year to everybody. This session will be interesting largely because it's an election year, and this will be my fourth. This is my fourth term, and I've seen 4 election cycles. And the bad news is there's often a lot of sort of hot air and hyperbole, and unfortunately not a whole lot of meaningful action that gets done during election year sessions. Depending on your perspective, that's a good thing or a bad thing. The other thing that's different this year is legislation that the governor vetoes can't be taken up next session for an override. The Constitution doesn't allow a new General Assembly to override the governor from a prior session. They would have to pass an entirely new bill. So that strengthens the governor's position during this session, which from my political perspective is a really good thing. It also strengthens his ability to negotiate with the legislature, which I think serves Marylanders quite well. I know one of the main focuses for at least the Republicans in the legislature and the governor is, again, working at advancing what the governor calls the Repeat Violent Felons Act, to really take a hard look at the laws that we have on the books to prevent repeat violent felons from getting back on the streets, which is what's happening so often in our communities. We talk about Baltimore City a lot, but in my part of Anne Arundel County, we've had carjackings, tons of robberies, armed robberies. I mean, there's really quite a problem with crime in our region, and it seems to be getting worse. We're going to try to advance legislation to, right now, if you steal a firearm, almost all the guns that are used in crimes in Maryland and in Anne Arundel County are used with, stolen firearms. Almost none of them are acquired legally. And in Maryland, the theft of a firearm is a misdemeanor. So we're going to try to make that a felony in Maryland as well. Another big problem with crime is our court system, and whether it's the the prosecution or the lack of prosecution that we're seeing in Baltimore City. You know, around the country, places like Seattle, for example, recently fired their prosecutor. You think of it as a very Democratic stronghold in Seattle. They fired their Democratic state prosecutor and elected in this last election a Republican prosecutor, just because people are just so fed up with all of the ongoing and worsening crime problems there. And I think that, other places around the country are doing that too. And Baltimore really needs to wake up as it relates to this. We have some legislation that passed. It was actually bipartisan this last session that will add some transparency on what's happening with prosecutors in the state. She's in a different political party, but our prosecutor in Anne Arundel is not like this. She really wants to keep our area safe. In Baltimore, though, we've got a real problem, and this transparency legislation, I think, will put a real highlight on that. There's also a Judicial Transparency Commission that's been working to figure out ways to make the judicial system more transparent for citizens. We'll have legislation in Maryland this session that will allow cameras in the sentencing phases of court proceedings. So you think about, in certain instances, judges have allowed these repeat violent felons to plead down to much lower charges and to get back out on the street very quickly. And these aren't little petty crimes, small shoplifting. These are really dangerous, serious things that people should be frightened of. Maryland is one of just a few states that doesn't allow in the sentencing phases cameras to be in the courtroom for the Fox 45 to broadcast to citizens to see how these violent criminals are being treated. And then lastly, the other thing I want to mention is there's a big emphasis that we'll be putting on education this session. There's a movement around the country that Maryland is way behind on as relates to educational choice. We have public charter schools in Anne Arundel County, but Maryland has the worst laws in the nation as it relates to charter schools. We want to make it easier so that parents have choice as to whether they send their kids to public schools, private schools, or traditional or charter schools. So we'll have legislation that makes it a little easier for charter schools to survive within their more flexible framework. Legislation that will provide tax credits for real education expenses for homeschooled kids. And then lastly, the last thing I'll mention is we currently have a voucher program for kids that attend perpetually failing schools that have failed for decades. It allows them to get out of those schools and get into a private school environment. It's something the governor has supported. There's a waiting list for it. It's a really great program, but it's on the chopping block by the majority party. So we're going to be working hard to preserve that program as well. So with that, I'll stop and also be glad to answer any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Delegate, for that overview. I mean, crime and education are key elements to our quality of life here in the county, and having focus on those issues and trying to do things to make reduce crime and make education better are absolutely key to our success. So thank you for that focus. So we're going to open it up to Q&A here. So I'm going to ask is if folks have a question, if you can type it into the chat box, and we will get it to the delegate or the delegates and the senators. So we're going to kind of open this up to our four speakers. But to get things rolling, I want to kind of hit two issues kind of at once, and one relates to what Delegate Kipke was talking about. We're looking at an interesting financial situation here in the state, where we've gone from, as Senator Elfreth called it, a structural deficit to a structural surplus. Is, I guess, one is, how did that happen in the midst of this pandemic? Is it all federal money, or how do we explain that, and do we continue to have this good fortune?
Mark, I'm happy to take a jab at that one. So some of it's federal, certainly, that helped us shore up a number of funds like the Unemployment Insurance Fund. But let's be clear about this pandemic. It really did exacerbate two economies in Maryland, and folks who were doing well before the pandemic have frankly done even better since the pandemic in terms of the stock market, in terms of property values. And so because those folks are taxed at a slightly higher rate because of the progressive nature of our tax system, we received more revenue because, frankly, a lot of folks are doing well. So I think it's a couple of factors in there. And of course, spending is significantly up, particularly spending online. And we passed a bill a couple of years back called regarding the Wayfair decision at the Supreme Court's decision that allows us to receive sales tax revenue from online companies. And so we put that into education, as Delegate Kippy noted. It's always a priority for Maryland, is trying to have one of the strongest education systems in the country, important for our economy and our future. And we were able to direct the majority of the funding from online sales right into our K-12 public education. So we're well positioned, but again, as I said, I think the trick is ensuring we are using that funding, certainly not all of it, but in a way that is responsible and doesn't get us back into a structural deficit. And just a reminder, I know folks on this call know this, but one of the reasons we are not Congress is because we have to balance our budget. That's our one constitutional obligation every single session. We have to balance the budget. So that always puts guardrails on what we are able to do. We can only do what we can afford to do here in Maryland.
Okay, any other thoughts on our fiscal situation? Senator Reilly.
Thank you very much. As Senator Elfreth on the Budget and Taxation Committee knows, when we have an increase in our reoccurring revenues, we can do a few more ongoing programs year after year. We had a very, very significant influx of federal money, but it was one-time money. So we have to be very careful to spend it as one-time money and not commit ourselves to multi-year expenditures. The classic example is President Clinton had 3 years worth of funding for police to increase the number of officers on the street. But after 3 years, then those local communities, counties, states had to pick up the cost that the federal government wasn't going to do. So the money last year, and I presume there'll be a slug of money coming in this year, is one-time money. So again, schools, roads, infrastructure, special one-time projects, that's the appropriate thing. And we're looking forward to seeing what the federal government does.
Okay. So any other thoughts on how we've swung from structural deficit to surplus, which is a good thing, I believe?
It is a very good thing.
Yeah, and again, how the money is invested, or spent. And again, we've learned a lot from the pandemic, how we can shore up certain things, the broadband area being one, healthcare and access to it, and the increased emphasis we kind of are all seeing in terms of mental health and the need to provide those services in the workplace, but also in our schools. One issue that's been percolating, and you all mentioned it a little bit, is cannabis, and cannabis as a medical treatment, and the concept of cannabis as a recreational availability moving forward. And from a chamber standpoint or a business standpoint, is how that works its way into the workplace and the rules and regulations that it will impact employers, how they have to deal with folks that either are eligible for medical marijuana or have, if we move into the recreational world, it just creates a whole set of issues. And I guess I raise the concern because as legislation is crafted, I think that's an aspect that needs to be considered. Has there been any dialogue about that as we move forward with that issue of cannabis?
I'll wade in on that. I voted for medical cannabis for a lot of reasons. But the downside is if you have a medical cannabis card, you can't buy a handgun. In many businesses that do drug testing, the medical cannabis card doesn't excuse you from having a positive drug test. So it's a double-edged sword. If you're going that way where you want to take advantage of medical cannabis, you have to understand the repercussions. Again, we've had alcohol in our world for centuries. It's become a normal part of our life, but we still are very concerned about alcohol use among underage drinkers and adult abusers. I have a feeling we're going to face the same kind of issues if we expand it to recreational cannabis. And I don't know if our society is willing or ready to do that. The senator said, put it on the ballot. Well, I've already made up my mind. I'm much older than she is. I have seen the results of casual use, and not myself, of course, but in college I knew a lot of fellows. Anyway, I don't think the financial reward is worth the social cost. Thank you.
Again, from our standpoint, it's just the implication, how it comes back to the workplace and the employer and how that layers in there. A complicated issue for sure. So we did have a question from our group from Scott Wallace concerning accountability in our schools. How is there a way to, I guess he said, why not hold failing schools accountable for the problem? So any thoughts on that? I guess that's the for Delegate Kipke.
Yeah, I'll respond to it. I mean, I just think I've come to believe that the nature of the bureaucracy that surrounds public education makes it very difficult to do some of the common sense things that you'd expect. Teachers regularly complain about the bureaucracy that they have to deal with. And, frankly, we have amped up funding for our public schools. Some of our schools that are failing the worst receive over $20,000 per student in taxpayer funding. So I've come to believe that the best solution to sort of break through all of that is to provide increased options for parents and students to find the best educational setting for their child. I mean, if we sit around waiting and for certain schools to improve, it's been decades that many of these schools have been failing. It's not necessarily a teacher's fault. A lot of it has to do with very challenging environments where these schools are located. But as I said earlier, there are students in those schools. Almost all of them are the Voucher Program. The students are coming from those schools and getting into a different environment and finding their own personal educational success. And so the tug and pull that comes from the union, the educational bureaucracy, and frankly, the government makes it very difficult to hold those schools accountable. I don't want to say I've given up on it. I think we still need to try. But if we want immediate improvements for our students, educational choice, in my opinion, is the way to go.
Mark?
Yes, please, go ahead.
So I think I guess what I would add to what Delegate Kipke said is that, there is an elected body whose focus is on, the schools. And I think it's worth a conversation with the Board of Education, who are elected officials just like us, to sort of kind of discuss some of their ideas and what their policy and oversight prescriptions might be to deal with some of the problems. And I know we'll be meeting with them later this week to have a conversation and listen to some of the challenges that they see. And so, but I certainly would not want to overstep, their role and their responsibilities as elected officials in terms of coming up with some solutions to some of the problems.
And Mark, one comment, if I may. The issues of a failing school are oftentimes reflection of the community from which they come in, and how can well-intentioned professional teachers deal with drug addiction, family abuse, abandonment of the parents to the child's welfare. It is, we can't expect the school system to be the solution and the panacea for all of our social ills. A few years ago, we had a school superintendent who wanted to put a social worker in every school. Well, I got to tell you, I think most of our teachers are social workers, whether they're trained for it or not. they face these issues in their classroom and they do the best they can. I'm a big advocate for helping teachers, but some of these things are beyond the responsibility or the capability of our school system. I don't know. I don't think there's a magic bullet or a magic formula. I think we all have to work together to provide the public safety net for food, housing, employment, the things that we can control to make people's lives a little better, and hopefully that'll translate to the kids. As Delegate Kipke, I'm a big advocate of this program called Boost, where it's income appropriate people giving the choice to supplement going to a private school. Choice is a big factor, but we have to remember, if we draw a lot of intelligent, motivated families out of the public school system, what do we have left in the public school building? Just the teachers trying to do the best they can. So there is no easy answer, and I think we have to, again, work in a network of different levels: legislative, schools, and communities.
Mark, if I could just, a place where the Senate tends to be a very collegial place, and I'll say I agree with Senator Reilly on the social worker point. Our schools are dealing with unprecedented challenges because our students are dealing with unprecedented challenges, particularly because of the pandemic. And we do need more social workers. I represent 3 high schools, and Annapolis High School has 1 social worker on staff. And that's not enough for the students that come every day with challenges and they're looking for assistance. So we absolutely need to be investing more in social workers, more in school psychologists, more in counselors. And we've begun to do that with the blueprint for Maryland's future. Certainly not enough, but that is a place where both parties came together, particularly in the Senate, to invest more in mental health services for students. And I'll also just cap it off with the 5th plank of the blueprint for Maryland's future, the education bill we passed a couple years ago, it was about accountability. It was about how are we ensuring that the state investment and county investment is being used in the way the legislature intended while we make these great advancements in education. So empowering that accountability board is incredibly important. Unfortunately, they are not staffed right now, so it's very difficult for that accountability board, or maybe they just got the staff last month, but we're a bit behind in the accountability work that is essential moving forward.
Yeah, I think education is such a key issue, and it was clearly the leading issue, if you will, pre-pandemic. And the debate about Kerwin and the funding for that has somewhat dissipated, that we now maybe have the funding to move forward. And education here in the county is going to was really taxed, obviously, over the last year with virtual and the whole situation going on. And now with the search starting for a new superintendent, it's going to become even more critical. Are there any things in the pipeline in terms of, I mean, Kerwin, there still haven't been implemented, or things that the General Assembly may be working on this session for improving education at all levels? I throw that open to the 4 of you.
I have not been in conversations. We've been dealing with Kerwin or Blueprint. We use those 2 terms interchangeably. It's the same thing for the last 5 or so sessions. And we've had a number of vetoes and overrides and revisions and things like that. So certainly the game has changed. The board has changed because of the pandemic. And I think we do need to look more carefully at things like connectivity, things like remote learning, and things like increased supports for mental health. But Mark, I have not been in conversations about what that will look like this session.
My observation, Mark, is that we have been so focused on virtual learning and the pandemic environment that it's taken the oxygen out of the air for anything else at this time. We're focused on trying to get the kids back in school, catch them back up on things that they've lost. And I think there's been a lot of mental health issues from the past 18 months or so of remote learning. So I think we need to I don't think we should expect many major initiatives until the pandemic has burned out.
Yeah, I think one thing that you'll hear from all of us, and I'm sure we'll be looking at it to ensure it's there in the budget, but we need to make sure that with this extra money that's available, we're investing in mental health where it's needed in our school system. That, you know, it's critically important. Senator Alfrith reminded me of something with the transparency board that's been put in place with the Inspector General, and that was a really bipartisan thing that wasn't easy to achieve. And someone had asked the question about holding schools accountable. I don't know I think Fox 45 has done a good job exposing it, but that board with the Inspector General has really gone after ensuring dollars are making it to the classroom. And they've found places where it's not being done properly and people are being held accountable. So that's progress, so there's something to feel positive about as it relates to holding schools accountable.
So the only thing I would add, and that's sort of to demonstrate the collegiality that exists in the House as well, and agree with my friend, my good friend, Delegate Nick Kipke, is that accountability is important, and how we continue to roll that out is going to be critically important. I know that, and I've seen in my feeder, so I'm talking about North County High School, Old Mill, and Meade High. There have been some challenges. I mean, when you take kids out of school for 18 to 20 months, you bring them back into the school system, and they've been exposed to things that they might not have otherwise seen because they would have been in school. It creates all kinds of behavioral, emotional, and social challenges that are even impacting a lot of us as adults. So until we can kind of get through that, until we can, bring the resources necessary to bear to sort of deal with that, similar to what some of the businesses are facing because of the challenging environment, until someone comes up maybe on this call with a unique solution to address some of those issues. Certainly they'll get rich, but they'll also help us, address some of the challenges.
Yes. Well, we're almost at 9:30. So what I'd like to do is one, just thank you again, but also take a moment to recognize what today is. I mean, it's a 1-year anniversary of events that happened on the Capitol a year ago, and not a good day. But what I did hear in our conversation today from the members of both parties in both bodies is the word collegiality, bipartisanship, and y'all do work together. And because of that, I think we've got a functional government here in the state. And we talked about the Resiliency Authority, how 3 levels of government work together. That is a must. And Sherry Perkins talked a lot about partnerships, and that's what makes it work, is communication and keeping respect for differences of opinion and putting it on the table and coming up for a solution from the chamber's perspective for our members and from the legislator's perspective to deal with all your constituents, be they businesses and individuals. So thank you for that spirit of cooperation and producing government that actually does work for us. So prior to heading out, let me throw it over to our chairperson, Stephen Brown. Steve, any concluding comments before we wrap up for the day?
No, I'm very thankful for everyone's attendance today, participation today, and again, the collegiality to come up here and kind of talk through these issues. I know you have a lot facing you as you get into this chamber or this session coming up, and I just want to say, if there's anything that the chamber can do to engage with each of you, your constituents, or provide a platform to you to gather information from your constituents or to address any particular issue in your areas, we really want to be there to help support and facilitate that. So with that, again, I'll say thank you to everybody. I really appreciate it, and wish you all the best in the upcoming session.
All right. Good day, everyone. Thank you again.